All right, gang, today we're talking about printing again, preparing files for print. This is a little more of a practical, what you do as a designer in the printing world rather than just an overview of printing. So, just jump right in. Keeping your digital work habits pristine, starting good habits right now while you're learning the software is a big advantage. It will restrict to a minimum the need of tidying up your files before you send them to the printer, because you really have to get um, these days in digital work, you're designing and doing production work in the same files at the same time. That used to not be the case. It used to be production and design were very separate. That is not the case now. So once your client approves your design, it has to go to the printer, and you need to basically communicate to the printer what you need them to do. And that means being as clear as possible, getting rid of anything extraneous, any colors in your swatch panel that you're not using, get rid of. And we're going to go through a lot of the other things you need to do. We're going to talk about bleeds in a minute. Talk about photography now. Make sure any of your photography has been purchased. You have the rights to use them, and that they are well prepared size-wise. And we'll also get to that later on in this tutorial, or this, what is this, a lecture. Okay, so we're talking about the production stage, and basically a little blurb there about the true measure of a designer is not just conceptual and typographic, but also in handling of the process from start to finish, including preparing and sending out files to service bureaus and print vendors, or sending digital files to, again, if you were not printing, if your end user was digital, you'd be sending digital JPEGs or PDFs to whomever you were working with. But those files still should be, pretty much cleaned up. But in the printing world, it's a little bit more important because often the printer will be actually going into your files. And again, we're not going to go too deep into this because we don't do this in the class. I believe in the next graphic design class they get more into InDesign and preparing things for print. So things you must do: proofread everything. I am the worst at this. Don't follow my lead. Spell check. Every one of the programs has a spell check in it. At least do the InDesign one. And if you have a lot of things in Illustrator that are placed in InDesign, make sure you proofread, spell check rather, those in Illustrator, because InDesign can't go into an Illustrator file or a Photoshop file. You have to do that in the native application. Check your font spacing and alignment. And confirm image size and resolution, which I think we're going to talk about right now. Yeah, okay. So the one on the left, the parrot on the left, is obviously low resolution and looks terrible. The one on the right is higher resolution and looks better. One of the things to not fall for is InDesign. InDesign has a few different views. There's like normal view, and then, or typical, I think it's called, and then there's a higher quality view that makes everything look so much nicer. But it can fool you. It can take something that looks low resolution on your screen and suddenly make it look high resolution. So if you're not careful, if you're not checking your actual Photoshop files, your TIFFs or JPEGs, whatever you're sending out, you might send something that's too small to the printer. So you need to, first of all, don't look at it in that mode. Look at it in the typical mode, normal mode. But also, more importantly, go into Photoshop and make sure that all those images are the full size they need to be. And a full size means something that's used at 100% when it's 300 dpi. For example, if that red parrot, that's on my screen right now, it's about 2 inches by 3 inches. If I'm using it 2 inches by 3 inches and it's at 300 dpi, and I'm using that image at 100%, I've pulled it into InDesign, and you know how you can size things up and down? I've sized it to 100%, so it's exactly right. That's fine. But if I take this same image and blow it up to fill that entire screen, which means I probably blew it up to 800%, it's no longer a high resolution image, because it doesn't work that way. You've made it too large. You've got to size that up, get a larger file to start with, or go into Photoshop and size it up. So that's just something to be careful of. You can go up to about 120, 130. If you click on your image in InDesign and then look up at the percentage that your size that you're at, if it's below about 130, you're probably going to be okay. If it's higher than that, you need to do something, go back into the image and enlarge it or get a larger image. Okay, that is important. Proofread, spell check, confirm image size, resolution, define, bleed, and crop marks. I don't think we've talked about bleeds yet, and I believe I have oh, look at this, a little film about bleeds. It's very short. Let's see what we got here.
You may have heard the term.
In order for this to record properly, I can't listen to the sound when it's recording, so I hope they just didn't tell you any wrong information. I saw that it was in millimeters. I generally do things in inches, and I think just because InDesign lends itself to that, like I do everything is at a 16th of an inch, so I do things at 0.0625, then 0.125, then 0.1875. And I kind of do everything like that. So if I click on anything in my documents, and if it's not in one of those factors of a 16th of an inch, I know something is hinky and I should probably check on it. So now you know what a bleed is. I'll go into it further here. Okay, so your trim size is the size of your page. That's the blue on the upper left. If you want that's if you're doing an 8.5 by 11, and that's what the client wants, that's what you want, that's the trim size. Now, if you want to bring the color all the way to the edge of the paper, the only way to do that on an 8.5 by 11 piece of paper is to print on a larger piece of paper and then trim it down. Okay? Printers have grippers along the edge. When it grabs, you've seen it, I'm sure, in a laser printer. When it grabs your paper on the right and left, there's like a quarter of an inch where the little rollers grab your paper. There always has to be room for grippers. That's why you need a bleed. They can't, whether it's toner or whether it's ink on a digital or an offset press, it cannot go to the edge of the paper. So you need to just give it some spillover, basically, and then you have to go back in and trim it. Okay. So trimming is your final size. Bleed is what you add. If you have any artwork that you want to go to the edge, like a red box, you have to pull that red box farther out. I always do an 1/8 of an inch on each side. I'm not sure what I think they said 2 millimeters in the video. And crop marks is where the person will print it on a larger paper. It'll print all the way to that red, and then those crop marks, they'll go with a knife and cut where the crop marks are, and they'll cut it right to the trim line. Okay, so that's your trim and your bleed. Your safe is just an area where they suggest don't put important stuff too close to the edge, because printing can't think of the word I want, machinery, tools have gotten more sophisticated as the years have gone on, but there's always a possibility that they're off a little bit. And so if you've ever seen a giant pile of paper getting trimmed, it's like a giant guillotine that kind of comes down and cuts it right down. If that's off just a little bit, it might hit something important. And if it just hits a little bit of the color on the edge, no big deal. But you don't want it to hit a word. So just don't put your important stuff really close to the edge. That's what the safe area is. Okay? And when you look at the diagram on the right, it uses the term live area. And live is the same as safe area. Okay? Slug is just something that I know about from InDesign. You can add that. If you want to put notes to somebody, you can add a slug in your InDesign file. A slug is just an area. It's like bleed on crack. It's just like it's like more crop. Sorry, more bleed. It's more room around the edges is all that is. You don't really have to worry about that too much. So hopefully that has explained bleed into the ground for you. Moving on. Let's see, we're adding number 5, pre-flight package InDesign or make a PDF. Okay, so InDesign has this wonderful feature called packaging, which will package everything that you need to send to the printer. It'll do 3 things. It'll grab your file, several things. It'll grab your original native file, that's the InDesign one. It will make a PDF version of it. It will make a legacy version of the InDesign file just in case that the person who's receiving it, i.e. the printer, does not have the latest version of InDesign that you might have. And then it will take any image you've used and put it in a file called images or photos or something, and then, or links, I think it says, because it'll take anything. Sorry, photos or logos, anything, any EPS, TIFF, JPEG, anything. Puts in a folder, and it'll take all your fonts, do the same thing. So you then have a packaged folder that is ready to go to the printer. Okay, now that's giving the printer the native file. That's giving them everything. So with some printers, particularly lower end printers, when you're doing digital work, sometimes they just want a PDF file. So all they're going to want is your final PDF file. You can just email it to them and you're done. But a better printer is probably going to want the whole thing packaged. So the important thing for you to know is that there's 2 ways to do it. You can send them the whole kit and caboodle, package it up, or you can just give them the PDF file. And why you need to communicate with the printer and ask them what they want. And that's everything I just explained. You can send the native files or you can send the PDF files. A PDF file was created, go back a second, because not everyone had the software. These days with the Creative Cloud, most people have it. But a while ago, 10 years ago, we didn't have the Creative Cloud, less than 10 years ago. And each one of these software was somewhere between $700 and $1,000. So not everybody had them. So what a PDF file did was allow you to send an InDesign file to a printer who might not have InDesign, or anyone who might not have it, because it packaged the whole thing and compressed it into the portable document format, which is the PDF. That's how PDF started, using them as currency, so to speak, to send documents online. If I'm remembering correctly, it was a little bit of an afterthought when it came to PDFs. The main reason was that we used them was so that we didn't have to share software. You didn't have to have it. Okay, so you can read that. Yeah, that's basically what I'm saying there. All right, so the advantages of a PDF file is it's locked and your fonts are embedded. You do not have to send them your fonts. You don't have to send your artwork. Everything is locked and nobody can change your file. So if it's some kind of security thing and you don't want anyone to touch your stuff, they can't change it. I mean, they can, you know how to edit a PDF, but they can't do it easily. And that's new. In the old days, you could not really edit a PDF. Mobile format for a PDF makes it easy for you to send it to lots of people. Edits and mistakes more easily caught during production. Yeah, I think the going back and forth with PDF files allows for better proofreading. The old days, they actually had a person called a proofreader. That was their job. They worked in an agency, say a larger agency, and they just sat all day and they proofread things. That sounds like my ethering of hell for me, but that was a job. Right, we said that. All right, so here, number 6, check your colors. Change RGB to CMYK. When something is going to print, it's always going to be CMYK. And I have to beat that into your head. Always be CMYK. But the reason it can be confusing is we often edit in RGB. And the reason for that is Photoshop, you're looking at it on a screen. It's digital. It's got lights coming from behind it. It's not printed on paper. So RGB is its native tongue, so to speak. I mean, when Photoshop first came out, there wasn't the internet probably existed in the Al Gore kind of way that the internet existed, but it did not exist the way it did today. So people weren't designing for the internet. They weren't thinking, home pages were homely, no pun intended, and that wasn't really the reason. We weren't trying to make colors look great on screen because we weren't going to put them on screen. We were going to put them on print. but it's a digital medium. So in time, Photoshop became more digitally focused or more RGB focused, and a lot of the editing tools don't even work on CMYK. Sometimes if you go to edit an image and it'll be grayed out, just double check to see what your image is. I bet your image is going to be CMYK because it doesn't do certain techniques, certain filters and such on a CMYK image. So you want to work in CMYK, RGB, and get it where you want it to be, and then with your layered file, and then when you save a copy of it as a TIFF or a JPEG, you want to make sure that that is CMYK, and that's what you'll place in your file, probably in InDesign, that you're going to send to your printer. Okay, so next we have, all right, so on that note, you always want your colors to look as good as possible in their end product. If it's in the finished product, if it's going to be printed, you want it to look obviously as great as it can be. But there's a lot of factors that determine how you print. Aesthetics is first and foremost. However, budget is a big part of it, and I'm going to get into that in a second. Branding is an element. If you have a client like, and we're going to see it in a second, someone like Target who has a certain color red, and it needs to always be that color red and not a shade off that red, only way to guarantee that is to use a spot color, which is also known as a Pantone color. Now, there are many kinds of spot colors. Pantone is only one of the spot colors. There's other companies. However, it's much like Jell-O gelatin. We say Jell-O even though Jell-O is a name brand. We use it as the generic because Pantone is all anyone ever uses. I think in Japan there's one, Toyo, that we used to use that I'm not sure it's still in existence or not. But Pantone and Spot are pretty much synonymous. Now full color is the same as 4 color, the number 4, because it's made up of cyan, magenta, yellow, and black, also known as CMYK, also known as the process colors, process build, because as we talked about in color already, and we're going to get to it again, you're building color. You're taking those 4 raw material, those 4 basic fundamental colors, and building all the other ones out of it. However, that has its limits. And that's the point of this little video from lynda.com, which I think is quite good. So let me start this up.
So why do we need spot colors? Well, we as humans can see a wide range of colors. Scientists claim we're capable of seeing 10 million shades. And if that sounds like a lot, consider that some animals, such as tropical fish and birds, can see colors we can't. And in fact, bees can even see into the ultraviolet. Of course, we're not trying to print the ultraviolet. We just like to print the colors that we want to see. But there's a limit to what we can print. Now, this sort of odd-shaped rainbow that you see is supposed to represent the range of colors that we can see. Admittedly, you see a limit there that defines what we can see on a monitor, so clearly we're not seeing everything that we can see. But this is really just to give you an idea of what the capabilities are. The monitor gamut is reasonably big. The CMYK gamut is pretty much smaller, although you'll notice that there are some parts of the CMYK gamut that actually fall outside the monitor gamut. Colors like cyan, you really can't render faithfully on a monitor. You can come close, but you can't quite hit it. And then, of course, we have the Pantone gamut, which is wider than what we can see in either other reality, the CMYK or the monitor. And I'm using Pantone here, but there are other spot color systems, but the concept is the same. These are specially mixed inks that let us accomplish stuff in print that we couldn't with a combination of CMYK. Now, CMYK is adequate for photographic reproduction for the most part, but there are a lot of colors that we really like that we can't print within that gamut. Now, there are some colors that you could print equally well using spot colors or using CMYK. For example, and I just pulled this at random, PMS 235, you can approximate very closely with CMYK. But then when you come across colors like bright oranges or navy blues, you're going to find that you really can't print those satisfactorily with combinations of the process inks. And we tend to like those bright colors. And if you want to image those bright colors, you're going to have to use a spot color. And navy blue, very common problem. Think how many logos you know of that use navy blue. That always goes kind of gray, a little bit purple. You really can't do it with CMYK. If you want navy blue, you're going to have to use a spot color. And then, of course, if you want to print something like a metallic ink or fluorescents or neons, you can't even come close in CMYK. So that's why we need spot colors. We need to be able to create a special ink that accomplishes a color that we have our heart set on that we cannot approximate with CMYK.
A membership to lynda.com unlocks this
Okay.
entire course
Thank you,
and hundreds of
lynda.com.
others.
Unfortunate part, I might have already said this, the unfortunate part of putting videos in here is that I have to shut the volume down in order for it not to echo when you listen to it later. But I watched that a few times before and I thought it was quite good when I'm trying to get across to you. All right, here is an example that of using spot as well as process colors together. So this brochure for this very high-end law firm printed 6 colors. Most printing presses are a configuration of either 2 colors, 4 colors, 6 colors, and sometimes you get 8 colors. But back when this was printed in the 90s, 6 colors was pretty much the standard. So that means you have 6 wells. You have 6 tubs or wells, whatever, where you can put ink. And it has photography in it, as you can see. So that is 4 of the wells, because that's the 4-color process. You need 1 for black, 1 for cyan, 1 for magenta, 1 from yellow. Okay, that leaves 2. What are we going to do with our 2? This is how you had to think as a designer, and you still do. It's a strategy. It's like, okay, how should I use my ink? I've got 6 things. How should I use them? This client had very specific needs for the red color. They actually call it Brinks Red, which is the name of the company. So it always has to be the same color. They could not rely on the 4-color process, CMYK, to match the red. It just doesn't work with it. It's just not as vibrant. It looks dead. So we had to use this as a spot color or a Pantone color. So that was our 5th well. So we had the 4 colors. We had the spot color was our 5th color. And then in the 6th well, if the client happened to have 2 brand colors, like a blue, we would have put the blue in there, but they didn't. They had the 1. So we had, a little bit of wiggle room for the 6th color. So we put in a varnish, and that is a very common thing to do. You put either a gloss varnish or a matte varnish to give it texture, to give it more of a finish. It's kind of like just think about looking at a floor with a nice finish on it. It has a richer look to it, feels better to the touch. And also, most importantly, it protects the artwork. So if you have a lot of large images like this had, particularly dark images, they can scratch very easily. So that's one of the reasons you would put a varnish on it. And that was what do they call it? Inlay varnish. No, that's not quite the right word. They do it during the printing process. Other varnishes, they wait till this dries and then they put it through the printer through a separate pass and then put the varnish on. Inline is the word. Inline varnish. It's been a long time since I've spec'd one of those. And this is a Pantone swatch book. It's a series of pages that have these perforated swatches that you can pull out. You can use them and attach them to a printout from your in-office desktop printer. You'll print it out, and ultimately it's going to go to the commercial printer and print it in the offset lithography. But for now, you're still getting it approved. So you print it in your office, and it looks pretty good, but like, ooh, that red, let's stay with red. That red just doesn't look right. So you'll pull one of the chips off of here and tape it to the output, and write a little note that says, okay, ignore how the red looks in my printout. It's going to look like this color. So it's used as a communication vehicle very often for clients and for printers. So I think we're getting into, 2-color. This is a 2-color job. The smaller the press, there's usually a 2-color press, 4-color press, 6-color press. think there's an 8-color press. I might be making that up. I don't quite remember. 6 is the most I can remember, but 8 sounds right. The smaller the press, usually the cheaper the job. Like this is just, you for example, you can't do 4-color processing, CMYK, on a 2-color press because there's only 2 colors. So this is a 2-color job. In one well, there was purple, and one well, there was black. And it's as simple as that. It's kind of as simple as printing gets. We already watched that movie. Yeah. So this is an example of also the client wanted that particular color. Purples are also hard to build CMYK, so they wanted this particular color. And here's an example of a few jobs that use limited color, I'd call it, in a really interesting, great way. It doesn't have to look like I didn't have enough money and I only could afford 2 colors. It could make it look like it's on purpose. I mean, those bags, I think they're for coffee. Those 2 bags at the bottom, those are gorgeous. And I think they use some kind of different, like a transparent ink, because you're getting another color in there by overlaying the 2 other colors, which is not how inks usually work. But I think I don't have much experience with that, but I think it's called transparent ink. And the one above it, in the old days, that would have been a 1-color job because you probably could buy yellow paper back then. Back in the 80s and 90s, we had a whole bunch more paper because there was a lot more printing. We still have printing today, but not like we used to. I mean, a lot of printers went out of business in the 90s. And thus the printing companies don't have as great an array of selections. So if you wanted a yellow background like that today, you'd have to pick a white paper and then do a flood of yellow, and then print the black on top of that. But back when that was printed, that was probably just a 1-color job. Look how effective it is. This is a 6-color job, not using the process colors. This is 6 independent spot colors. Black and the red in the client's logo, and then those 4 colors you see in the bar above it. And one of them, you can't tell in a PDF, but that purple color is a metallic ink. And that's another thing you cannot do in digital printing, only in offset printing. Silver, gold, pewter, whatever. So once again, CMYK. You've seen this before. So the image is printed. It's an illusion of light, paper, and patterns of ink. Patterns of ink, that's what the dots are, that rely on the visual cortex in your mind, blending the information received from the retinas into a logical image. So that's why I call it building the color. When you step far away from this, it's going to look like skin tone, but it's not. It's an illusion. It's all smoke and mirrors. So the question, I think we might have answered already, is why would you not just use 4-color all the time? And I think this example I already used, and the red tells you why, is that you want the consistency of having the color always look the same. And there are colors that the 4-color process cannot capture. Good example here, orange. The orange, Pantone orange, out of the can on the far left. The second one is the same color on an uncoated sheet, and we'll get to that in a second, the difference between coated and uncoated and how colors change. The third one is a built, the process color, the CMYK color, the 4-color version of that orange 21. That's as close as building the color through this method. That's as close as that can come to matching that vibrant orange on the left. Okay, so if you were I don't know, FedEx. I think that's a little deeper than FedEx's color, but let's just say it's not. And you're a company with a lot of money, and your brand is important, and consistency is vital. You don't want to build that orange because it's going to look like that pumpkin orange over there, and not that intense orange. So why use PMS? Better ink coverage, more accurate color. CMYK, more color options. Cost, practicality, budget. This woman is kind of crazy, but I actually think it's pretty good. So I'm going to play this.
Coated, uncoated, coated, uncoated. When picking a Pantone, you're faced with a critical decision. And I hate to do this, guys, but I've got to. This entire episode is one big flubber. Here's why. The same color ink can look completely different on a glossy material than it does on a matte material. And before you order thousands of boxes, you want to make sure you've specified it correctly. This is a big deal, guys. So let's do this thing. The difference between coated and uncoated is so pivotal that Pantone literally provides a whole separate book for the different types. But the terms are a little bit of a misnomer because it's not actually the color that's coated or uncoated, it's the material. So Pantone 299U and 299C, it's the exact same ink, one is just printed on a glossy surface. So why do colors look so different on different surfaces? Let's bring this to life. On a plain old piece of paper, a classic uncoated material, when you put ink on it, it really soaks in, kind of taking on the character of the matte surface and losing a bit of vibrancy. But if you take that same ink and put it on a coated material, like a dry erase board, it remains a bit brighter, retains vibrancy, and has a gloss look just because of the material. So how does all of this affect the colors that you use in your designs? Well, let's say you're designing for printed packing tape. That stuff is shiny, so you're going to have to pick a coated color. On the flip side, if you're designing for craft gum paper tape, that stuff is matte, so it's imperative that you pick an uncoated color. It's really critical that going into your design process, you're actually picking the right swatch for your material. I'd like to invite in our handy dandy Lumi pre-press designer to explain exactly how important. And now we've landed at another key thing that you can get wrong. All right, coated and uncoated color can be very confusing. Let's say you've chosen a beautiful Pantone for your brand, 1655U. And it looks beautiful on your business cards, and it looks beautiful on your matte boxes. But when you go to make a glossy brochure, you may have to pick an entirely different Pantone in order to get it to look similar to your eye. Keep in mind that this isn't cut and dry, folks. Color takes matching, and you want to make sure you like how it looks. Here's another fun fact for you guys. Light and dark colors are not created equal, and it's not just because they look different. Light colors have less pigmentation and more transparent pigments in the mix, and that makes them less prone to look wildly different on glossy and matte surfaces. So if your brand color looks kind of like this, you might not see a huge shift, but if you're down here or you're trying to have like a rich navy brand color, you're gonna really have to be careful about your coated and uncoated color choices. I know color can be stressful. Living life in a flub alert is also stressful. Let's take things down a notch, guys. The good news here, if you're feeling like, how could I ever know what my color is going to look like on my final material, is that there's something called a color drawdown. Most printers and manufacturers and packaging partners can help you get one for your idea. And it's your actual ink color used on your actual material so you can see what it's going to look like. And you can get them for boxes, so this is the actual paper with the box color on it, or for poly mailers and plastic products as well. It adds about a week to your production timeline, but it really gives you that peace of mind of knowing exactly how your color is going to turn out. When it comes to coated and uncoated, there's no right or wrong answers. It comes down to personal taste. Uncoated, coated. Uncoated, coated.
All right. Once again, I had to put her on mute, but in the past, she made a lot of sense. Crazy though she may be. All right. Moving on. I think she covered this pretty well in her video. I think I had this in the presentation before I found that video. So there you go, coated and uncoated. Here's a side view illustration of what we're talking about. Think of it, if you've ever refinished floors that have no varnish on them, things soak right into them. That's uncoated. When you put the varnish on, that's coated. The light reflects right off of it. So, on our list of stuff we're doing, we are down to choosing paper, which is, we're learning about paper right now with the uncoded, but a little bit more on paper. Paper can enhance or diminish the vibrancy of your image. You've already seen on an uncoated sheet, the ink soaks up and is less vibrant. On glossier stock or coated stock, it's going to pop. Paper stock is manufactured in a large assortment of weights, colors, textures, and finishes. Make sure you want to select the right one that's going to work to make your piece the most successful. If you're working for a nature conservatory, maybe you want to put it on uncoated paper because it looks more natural and it's just less processing. It's not using as many chemicals because there's no varnish on it. Also, recycled papers, which are probably just common to you all, were newish in the 90s. There was a whole big push to start adding 10%, 20%, 30% recycled waste back into paper. And then it became who can make their recycled paper the whitest, which means they added more bleach, which was also bad for the environment. So printing industry, round and round. So paper, lots of choices, a lot less now, as I've already mentioned, because we don't print as much as we used to. Okay, attributes of paper. Weight, the weight of paper. You can see on there in the little chart, we talk about bond. Bond paper is pretty much just what you put in the Xerox machine. It's super light. You've probably experienced that where there's some different weights of it. The higher the number, the heavier the paper. I don't quite recall where the pound must come from, how much poundage they got per bushel or a peck or something. I'm not really sure where the term, but we talk about things in pounds, 24 pound text, 60 pounds, 70 pound, 140 pound. The higher the number, the heavier it is. So you can see the first three columns there. It's all pretty sequential. You get the light bond ones, and then when you get into text is what you would do a nicer brochure with. That's going to be 60 or 70 pound is going to be, even 80 pound would be a page of a nice brochure. 100 pound text gets to be a little bit heavy. That might be perhaps a cover. Now you get into cover weight, which 65, 80, 90, blah, blah, blah. 80 pound covers, probably 80, I've never heard of 90 before, but 80 pound cover is sort of what you probably think of as a standard cover weight for like a brochure. Go to a car dealership or somewhere, have the brochure. The cover would be heavier and the inside will probably be like a 70 pound text. So you might see that from a printer, 80 pound cover and then 70 pound text on the inside. Board, don't worry about board. You're not going to really use that for anything. That just gets confusing why they go into points rather than pounds. Texture is another standard attribute of paper. You have felt weave, linen. There used to be a lot of different ones, not as much anymore. Smooth is another one. Brightness, different levels of white. And I mentioned that already with the recycling, how I can't help but look at really white paper and just think how much bleach is in it. So they try to help the environment and then they undercut it by using a bunch of bleach. But because white, think about it, white is going to yield the poppiest color when it's printed on. So the lighter the substrate, the lighter the background is when you print on it, the more your image is going to pop. Color paper is produced by dyeing. This is a swatch book of paper. Those used to also come out a lot. There used to be paper representatives. They worked for the paper companies, and they would come around, much like you sometimes see, I see more on television than anything, pharmaceutical reps. They go to doctors, and they bring their wares with them, and they leave gifts for them, and they schmooze them, and basically their goal is for the doctors to prescribe the medications that they drop off, and that's how the paper people were. They wanted you, when you go to print, they wanted you to specify their particular paper for your job, because then the printer would purchase the paper from that merchant and they would make the sale. So this is already colored paper. So when I was talking before about that yellow, that job that you might have to print the yellow, this is an example of paper that actually already is. You can see the yellow, the canary color there. Interesting. Opacity is another thing. Most papers are just opaque. But vellum is a word we use for basically for you, it's tracing paper. It's high-end tracing paper that has different levels of clarity. We call it a fly sheet, like when you open a fancy brochure and the first page is made out of tracing paper, vellum, and it might have like a quote on it, or it might have nothing. It might just be like a fancy little divider before the first page. That's vellum. Here is, so we talked about uncoated paper and coated paper. Within the world of, so we've already seen the bottom one and the top one and the bottom one. The one in the middle is matte coated. That's a coated paper that has a dull coated. So there's uncoated, which is no varnish at all. There's gloss coated at the bottom, which has a sleek glossy varnish. And then there's matte coated, which has a varnish, but sometimes you're not sure it has a varnish. It has a very rough varnish. So it's somewhere between the two. Like when you get anything that's matte rather than gloss, it has some kind of shine to it, some kind of finish, but it's just dull. Here's an example of something printed on coated and uncoated, which I think the woman in the video covered pretty thoroughly. Look at that donut though, it looks so amazingly different. All the highlights, little sugar and stuff, that gets completely lost. And matte versus glossy. You can see where the photographer put light on, so you can see where the glossy, how shiny it is there. Okay, so finishes and paper and coatings. Talked about with that red, that Brinks job, putting an inline varnish. It's also things called UV coatings, aqueous coatings, and laminates, which I'm not going to go into what those are. They're just different kind of coatings in case you hear those words. I've already mentioned why you would put a varnish, often to use for protection. Dark colors, like this would be considered dark enough, can also scratch. And then varnish can be used creatively. I love this. This is just gorgeous. You could do a thing where you, the one in the top right, you would print black, and then you would print a dull varnish on the background. Okay, and then you would go back and print the gloss varnish on top of that, and maybe do even a second pass, one pass through the press, and then maybe another one to build it up, and that's what you would get. There's also something called what am I trying to say? Foil stamping. So foil stamping, like when something's a really shiny gold or a shiny silver, almost like you could scratch it off, that's usually from a piece of foil that is stamped in the printing process, or afterwards, the finishing technique is stamped into the paper. And they can do the same thing with just a clear foil, it's called, which that one up top might be a clear foil as well. See, it's like total printer nerd talk, where there's like, oh, it might be a clear foil. But you can get some really cool effects. I think the important thing for you is to know that these sort of things exist, and just look at it and think, what does it portray to you? Does it seem like, if my client really want to portray wealth, or like a high-end product, I'm working for Mercedes or something, this might be a kind of technique that we might want to use for them. Spot UV varnish. You can put like a texture on there with the varnish. Paper can also, it can be more than just a supporting player. It can be the big deal with the creative that up top there is called a blind emboss. So an emboss is anything that pushes into the paper. A blind emboss is when there's no ink on the other side of it. It's just white on white. So it's purely the emboss. In most cases, they emboss and then put a stamp on it, like this Francis Coppola. The Coppola was embossed from the back, but then it has a gold foil that's pressed into the paper. So it's a two-part process. You can see it better on the little devil standing on the ball there. Usually a pretty expensive process. Here's some more. These are the foil stamps I was talking about. I should have showed you this first. You see, you would never, particularly on this H on top, that's an uncoated paper, which means it sucks the ink in. If you printed a silver ink, a spot color ink, a Pantone metallic silver, it would never look like that on that paper because it's uncoated paper. It would suck into it. So the only way to get that effect is to foil stamp it. And that's part of what your job is as a designer. You need to think big, like, wouldn't it be cool if this like really stood out in this paper? It'd be so elegant. But then you have to think through, how do I do that? And printers often can help you with that. You can say kind of the effect you're going for, and they're the ones that can say, well, you know what, we have this new process, we can do this, or we can foil stamp it, or we can, you'll wind up paying for it, but they'll put that into their estimate, and then you just present it to your client, and they decide they want to pay for it or don't want to pay for it. But you've done your job in kind of making something beautiful come to life. These are die cuts. Think about when you do a emboss like this, that white one, it's called a die. They actually sculpt it, and the paper goes on top of it, and something presses. It has different amounts of pressure it can put onto it, and that gives you different heights of how deep the die cut is going to go. Now imagine if you pushed all the way, you push through the paper. So this is an example of a die cut that's not embossing, but it's actually cutting out from the paper. So it's the same idea, you just a little more extreme, but also very cool. Laser cut or die cut. I'm coming to the end. It might be the last. I think this is the last one. The sculpted emboss, which is a blind emboss, white on white. But look at all the levels. I mean, that's why it's sculpted. It's gorgeous. And that's the end of printing. That was a lot. I crammed a lot in there. Paper, ink. Hopefully you're still awake and want to continue for the last few weeks of the course. Anyhow, I will sign off now. I think there's only one more lecture after this one. Lucky you, on advertising, I think. Maybe two, but I think it's just one. Do your quiz. Bye.